want to earn more. You want freedom. You want control. But look around. Everyone's chasing the same thing, running in circles, sprinting on a treadmill built by systems that profit off your ignorance. And still, they wonder why nothing changes. You don't rise in this world by wanting more. You rise by learning more. Not just information, but understanding. Wisdom perspective. The kind of learning that rewires how you move, how you see, how you decide. The man who learns commands the man who repeats. But you weren't taught that. You were taught to memorize, to comply, to follow the script, to sit still, raise your hand, obey. And for that obedience, they gave you a piece of paper and promised it would unlock your future. But what they never taught you was this: that learning is not something done for grades. It's something done for power. And the man who stops learning has already chosen his ceiling. You want to know why some men rise and others stay stuck. It's not talent. It's not background. It's not luck. It's the relentless decision to keep learning when others plateau. To ask questions no one else is asking. To read the sentence again until it breaks open. To study your failures not like punishments but like blueprints. To take notes, not for a test but for war. Because that's what this is. This life you're building. It's a battlefield. And every day, you're being tested. Every conversation, every decision, every thought is either building your mind like a fortress, or burning it down from within. And if you're not learning, you're losing. If you're not expanding, you're decaying. There is no neutral ground. Growth is not something that happens to you. It's something you decide to earn over and over again. So when you say you want to earn more, ask yourself, what are you actually learning? Not just in books, but in failure, in pressure, in patterns. When something breaks, do you curse it or study it? When someone leaves, do you collapse or analyze the lesson they carried? When money's low, do you just grind harder or learn smarter? Grinding without learning is just exhaustion. They lied to you when they told you hard work was enough. They said, just push harder, like you were a machine. But you are not a machine. You are a builder. And builders need blueprints. You don't build an empire by force. You build it by knowing what to build, why it matters, and how it lasts. That only comes from learning. Strategic, ruthless, intentional learning. But you've been skipping that part, haven't you? You've been trying to shortcut wisdom with hustle, trying to replace structure with speed. But let me be clear. The world does not reward the fastest. It rewards the most aligned. The man who knows what he's doing and why. The man who keeps sharpening the blade while others swing dull swords into stone. That's why you keep burning out. That's why you keep building and breaking. Because you're moving fast without evolving. You don't need more speed. You need more sight. And sight comes from knowledge. Not just academic, but ancient. Earned inner law that speaks louder than fear. And it only comes to the man who keeps learning, even when others think they've arrived. Do you know what makes a man dangerous? It's not rage. It's not muscles. It's depth. The man who's read 100 books on leadership moves differently than the man who's just loud. The man who studies his craft like scripture creates results that can't be faked. The man who understands psychology, economics, patterns of history. He walks into the room and changes it without raising his voice. Because he doesn't need to guess. He knows. Learning makes you unshakable. Because when chaos hits, you have more than emotion. You have principles. When the market shifts, you have more than luck. You have insight. When people leave, when money fades, when plans fall apart, you have something most men never built: mental infrastructure. But you don't get that from motivational quotes. You get that from pages, from failure, from silence. You get that from picking apart your past, like an engineer reverse, engineering the future. You get that by asking, what do I not know that's keeping me stuck? What do I believe that no longer serves me? What has life been trying to teach me that I've ignored? The future belongs to the educated, not the entertained. So ask yourself, do you scroll more than you study? Do you consume more than you create? Are you training your mind like a muscle, or numbing it like a screen? Because your brain doesn't care what you feed it. It will obey whatever rhythm you repeat. If you keep feeding it distraction, confusion, noise, it will become a machine of uncertainty. But if you start feeding it law, rhythm, clarity, focus, it becomes a command center, a weapon, a throne. That's why the richest men in the world still read. Not because they need to, but because they know the truth. Every level of income requires a higher level of insight. You want to go from 10K to 100K. You need a new framework. You want to go from 100K to 1M. You need a new philosophy. Every ceiling you hit isn't made of glass. It's made of what you don't yet understand. And here's the tragedy. Most men will never rise. Not because they're lazy, but because they stopped learning. They stopped studying. They thought school was the end. They thought experience alone would teach them. But experience without reflection is just repetition. Experience without wisdom is just aging. You are not paid for time. You're paid for value. And your value is tied directly to what you know, how you think, and how fast you adapt. So if you want to earn more, you have one job: Become smarter, faster, deeper, sharper than you were yesterday. That is the real game, and the men who master it don't need to chase money. Money chases them. Because value is magnetic, and value is the byproduct of learning applied. The more you study psychology, the more you earn in persuasion. The more you study finance, the more you keep what you earn. The more you study yourself, the more you unlock energy, discipline, self-respect. Every single domain of your life, your income, your body, your leadership, your peace, is tied to the learning you're willing to commit to. This is not optional. This is law. You say you want a better life, then become a better learner, not casually, but obsessively. Make learning part of your identity, not your hobby. Make it non-negotiable. Make it sacred. Stop waiting for a coach to tell you what to do. Become the man who can coach himself. The man who reads before the sun. The man who studies during chaos. The man who listens while others talk. The man who takes notes like his future depends on it, because it does. And here's the final truth. The man who learns daily will eventually rule the man who only reacts, because reaction is weakness. But wisdom is command. So study relentlessly, not for applause, not for pride, but because the more you learn, the more you earn. And not just in dollars, in power, in clarity, in choices, in freedom, in legacy. Because money comes and goes, applause fades, but wisdom compounds. And one day, the world won't be able to ignore the man who became unstoppable, not by chance, not by charm, but by choice. By learning when others stopped, by thinking when others scrolled, by rising when others coasted. That man is you, if you decide. You don't get paid by the hour, you get paid for the value you bring to the hour. So every time you show up without growth, without improvement, without upgraded thinking, you're telling the world, this is all I have. And eventually, the world stops listening. Not because it's cruel, but because value obeys evolution. If you're not evolving, you're not earning. But here's the good news. The ceiling over your life isn't built from concrete. It's built from ignorance. And ignorance can be broken with understanding. Not overnight, not all at once, but piece by piece, day by day, as you study the patterns, the principles, the mental frameworks that the elite never stop mastering. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you read something that made your blood move? When was the last time you paused a sentence and rewrote your plan? When was the last time a line hit you so hard it became a lifestyle? That is what real learning does. It doesn't just inform, it transforms. It doesn't just give you new answers. It demands a new identity. And if you haven't felt that kind of shift in a while, maybe it's not the world that's stuck. Maybe it's you. Not because you're incapable, but because you got too comfortable. You got too impressed with what you already know. But comfort is the enemy of clarity, and the moment you stop learning is the moment your past becomes heavier than your future. Look closely at every man who ever changed his life. He didn't do it with luck. He did it with information, with obsession, with a moment where he finally got tired of not knowing, tired of depending on luck, tired of guessing. He picked up a book, or a principle, or a question, and refused to let go until it rewrote his life. That is the man who earns. Not the passive man, not the prideful man, but the man who sits down, opens the page, studies the loss, and says, "Teach me." Because humility is the gateway to expansion. Pride builds a wall around your mind, but humility cracks it open and says, "I don't care how much I've done, I want to become more." That's how champions rise. Not by being right, but by being teachable. Do you understand the power of that? Teachable men are unstoppable men. Because while others defend their limitations, the teachable man rewrites his code. While others pretend to know, the learner knows there's always a deeper layer. And when you live like that, when you live like a seeker, the world opens to you. Not all at once, but in layers, in revelations, in unlocked doors that most men never even knew existed. You're not stuck, you're just untrained. You're not unlucky, you're just uninformed. You're not broken, you're just unexposed to the knowledge that would turn your mess into mastery. And I promise you, it's not hidden. It's been written, spoken, documented. But you've been scrolling when you should have been studying, numbing when you should have been noticing, asking for a breakthrough when the breakthrough was on the bookshelf the whole time. This world is not fair, but it is predictable. It doesn't reward those who complain. It rewards those who prepare. And preparation is built through learning, through planning, through deep thought, through frameworks and decision, trees and mental simulations that separate the wise from the wishful. And here's what you'll learn, once you commit to mastery, that every level of chaos has a hidden order, and every system of power has a code, but only the man who studies can see it. Everyone else is reacting, but the learner is creating, decoding, anticipating, and that's why he gets paid more. That's why he gets called when others get ignored. That's why he builds things others only dream of. Not because he's more charismatic, but because he's more equipped. Equipped with frameworks, equipped with understanding, equipped with the language of growth, of finance, of psychology, of strategy, of self. He's not winging it, he's winning it. And it's because he took time to learn when others were chasing shortcuts. And if you want to become that man, you must change the question you ask every morning. Stop asking, how do I get rich? And start asking, what am I missing? What don't I know yet that someone at the next level already does? Because the only difference between where you are and where you want to be is what you haven't learned yet. And that's not depressing. That's power. It means every time you study, you step closer. Every time you learn, you level up. Every time you humble yourself to knowledge, the world expands to meet you. But don't confuse motion with learning. Don't confuse noise with wisdom. Real learning is not just collecting ideas, it's aligning them, applying them, testing them in the battlefield of your life. It's sitting with a single concept until it burns off every excuse, until it forces you to act differently, speak differently, choose differently. And let me tell you what happens when you live like that. People will notice, not because you tell them, but because you move like a man with depth. You walk into the room and people feel something different. Not flash, but force. The kind of silent confidence that can only come from one thing, a mind that has been trained in fire. That's what learning gives you. Not facts, not trivia, but clarity, precision, command. You stop reacting to life and start commanding it. You stop wondering how to respond and start predicting the game 3 moves ahead. Because when you learn, you start to see the patterns under the chaos, the structure beneath the noise, and suddenly, you're not overwhelmed. You're in control. That is the real reward of learning. Not just earning more money, but earning more choice, more clarity, more time, more identity. You don't build a powerful life with scattered thoughts and surface-level knowledge. You build it with studied principle, with internal law, with sacred, structured, repeated learning that rewrites your entire nervous system. So ask yourself this, and answer honestly. If your life was audited today, what would your study habits say about your future? Would they scream expansion? Or would they whisper excuses? Would your calendar reflect a man preparing for greatness, or reacting to distraction? This is not about perfection, this is about pattern. The man who becomes great doesn't always know the answer, but he never stops searching, he never stops learning, he never stops sharpening, and that's what makes him inevitable. You want to become inevitable? Then build your learning like a ritual, not a to-do, not a task, a law, a sacred law of your identity that says, I study, I sharpen, I master, no matter how I feel. And when you build like that, there's no room for randomness, there's no room for softness, there's only movement, momentum, mastery. Because, here's the brutal truth, the man who outlearns you will out-earn you. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually, his discipline will compound into dominance. And when that happens, no amount of charm, hustle, or talent can save you, because effort can be matched. Personality can fade, but knowledge, real embodied lived knowledge, that stays. And it shows up when pressure hits. It shows up when things go wrong. It shows up when your plans break and your schedule crumbles. Because when you've been learning, really learning, you have options, you have solutions, you have range. And range is what separates the man who panics from the man who pivots. That's why the highest paid men in the world aren't just workers, they're thinkers. They don't just grind, they design. They don't react, they recalibrate. And they earned that right by building their minds into machines of insight. They didn't get lucky, they got trained. And so can you, but only if you stop treating growth like a trend and start treating it like oxygen. Only if you stop learning when it's convenient and start learning because it's who you are. Because at some point, the world's going to test you. Life's going to throw a storm at you that's bigger than your current level. And if you're not prepared, it will break you. Not because you are weak, but because you are under-equipped. Power is a product of preparation, and preparation is a product of learning. So build yourself like a fortress. Study like your life depends on it, because it does. Every conversation, every negotiation, every relationship, every decision, they all reveal your level. And if your level is low, the world won't wait. It will simply move on. Not because you're unworthy, but because you weren't ready. Read more, think deeper, speak slower, write clearer, observe longer. These are not soft skills. These are survival codes. These are the difference between being replaceable and being revered. Between hoping for success and engineering it. Every time you invest in your learning, you raise your floor, you increase your minimums. And in a world where volatility is the norm, the man with the highest floor wins. Not the man with occasional peaks, but the one whose worst day is still miles above average. And do you know how you build that? Through boring, consistent, relentless repetition. Through reading when it's not sexy. Through study when no one's watching. Through journaling your lessons not for content, but for clarity. You don't rise by being impressive. You rise by becoming undeniable. Because learning rewires your identity. It forces you to confront what you don't know. And in doing so, it kills your ego. And when ego dies, growth begins. And when growth becomes your addiction, wealth follows like a shadow. Not just financial wealth, but emotional wealth, relational wealth, spiritual wealth. The kind of abundance that makes you magnetic, that makes people lean in when you speak. That makes rooms shift when you walk in. Not because you're loud, but because you know. You know yourself. You know your craft. You know your mission. And no algorithm, no opinion, no economy can take that from you. Because once you've earned it in silence, the world can't touch it. They can take your title, but not your wisdom. They can take your audience, but not your command. They can take your platform, but not your power. Because true power is portable. And the man who learns becomes the man who leads. Across industries, across storms, across seasons. And you have that choice right now, not later. Now, to stop drifting and start drilling. To stop floating and start forging. To declare that from this day forward, you will not coast on old winds. You will not wait for someone else to teach you. You will not be a slave to ignorance, pride, or laziness. You will study. You will grow. You will master. And when you do, when that decision gets burned into your daily rhythm, everything will change. Not because the world got easier, but because you got stronger. You became the man who learns when others sleep. You became the man who upgrades while others repeat. You became the man who earns, not by chasing money, but by becoming too valuable to ignore. And here's the final truth that most will never understand. Learning is the ultimate leverage, because when you know more, you can see what others can't. You can move before others react. You can speak what others fear. You can solve what others avoid. And that means in any room, in any business, in any challenge, you hold the edge. Not because you're the loudest, but because you're the sharpest. So say this now, not as a wish, but as a vow. I learn daily. I evolve relentlessly. I earn power because I build understanding, and I will never again apologize for the weight of my mind. Say it again, until your bones believe it. I learn daily. I evolve relentlessly. I earn power because I build understanding, and I will never again apologize for the weight of my mind. Because this is your weapon now. This is your rhythm now. This is your identity now. And no one, not failure, not delay, not distraction, can take it from you. You are becoming unstoppable, not because you're lucky, but because you learn. You want proof that learning changes everything? Look at every empire ever built. Behind it was a man who read when others partied, who asked questions when others stayed silent, who wrote down his observations until they became commandments. Success does not start with money. It starts with mastery. And mastery begins with a mind that refuses to stop expanding. Look at history. Carnegie studied men. Ford studied systems. Edison studied failure. Napoleon Hill studied the mind. These men didn't become legends by accident. They became legends because they studied life like it was a science, and lived it like it was war. While others were reacting, they were writing law. While others waited for motivation, they carved their routines into stone. While others complained, they consumed knowledge with hunger, knowing it would one day turn to power. And when it did, the world called them geniuses. But they weren't gifted, they were committed. Because here's what no one tells you. Genius is not mystery. Genius is structure. Genius is discipline. Genius is repetition. Genius is knowing something so deeply that your instincts become intelligence. You want to look smart in the room, then learn when no one is watching. Because the man who learns in secret becomes the man who leads in public. But here's the catch. The more you learn, the more responsible you become. Because knowledge removes the excuse of ignorance. It shows you where you've been soft, blind, entitled. It demands that you upgrade, not just your income, but your integrity. Because true learning doesn't just give you tools. It exposes your laziness. It says, you knew better. Why didn't you do better? And if you're not ready to be held to that standard, you're not ready for greatness. Learning is not always comfortable, but it's always correct. It forces you to evolve, to confront the lies you believed, the shortcuts you chased, the stories you told yourself to avoid pain. It takes a hammer to your identity and says, you want to earn more, then become more. And becoming more starts here, on the page, in the mirror, under pressure, in silence. So let's make this practical. Ask yourself, what have I learned in the last 30 days that would justify a raise? What insight have I gained that makes me more valuable to the people I serve, the world I touch, the systems I lead? And if that answer is weak, don't feel shame, feel urgency. Because you're one book away, one breakthrough away, one brutally honest conversation with yourself away from a completely different trajectory. But only if you move, only if you study, only if you commit. No more vague goals, no more soft mornings, no more pretending that listening to a podcast while scrolling Instagram counts as growth. It doesn't. That's comfort disguised as progress. Real learning hurts. Real learning humbles. Real learning changes how you spend your time, how you choose your friends, how you schedule your day. Because once your mind expands, your standards follow. You stop tolerating mediocrity. You stop chasing low-level dopamine. You stop explaining your vision to people who don't read. Because you realize they won't understand your future if they've never studied your hunger. That's why learners become leaders. Because in a world drowning in noise, they find signal. In a culture obsessed with consumption, they choose creation. In a system built to distract, they train their focus like a weapon. And that's why they win. The man who learns builds leverage. The man who repeats builds resilience. The man who studies patterns builds prediction. And the man who combines all three, that's the man who becomes impossible to ignore. You want to win this decade? Then become unrecognizable from who you were last year. Not in appearance, but in awareness. Upgrade your frameworks. Learn how the top 1% thinks. Study how they spend their time, how they make decisions, how they build systems around their minds. You'll find the same thing every time. They learn fast. They apply faster, and they never stop. You think you're behind. You're not. You're just untrained. And training starts today. Not when you feel like it. Now, because if not now, then when? You already lost enough years trying to wing it. You already burned enough time hoping motivation would show up. But motivation is a guest. Learning is a king. And kings don't knock, they rule. So build your kingdom, and let learning be the law. Build a system so sharp, so specific, so sacred, that missing it would feel like betrayal. Build a routine where study is not a checkbox. It's a ritual. It's breath. It's identity. Because once you learn who you really are, you stop apologizing for your ambition. You stop asking for permission to grow. You stop shrinking in rooms that were never meant to contain you. You stop being a question mark. You become a statement. And that statement is this: I am no longer the man who waits. I am the man who learns, builds, commands. Not because I'm better than anyone, but because I study what most ignore, I apply what most forget, and I become what most only wish they could be. Say it again. I study what most ignore, I apply what most forget, and I become what most only wish they could be. Because the more you learn, the more you earn. Not just money, but mastery, not just success, but sovereignty, not just applause, but authority. And that authority doesn't come from being loud. It comes from knowing something so deeply, so undeniably, that even silence can't hide it. So study until the doubt fades. Study until the habits harden. Study until your future feels like gravity. Until people feel your presence, not because you ask for attention, but because you became too valuable to overlook. That's how empires rise. That's how legacies are built. That's how you earn. Not just once, but forever. And when that legacy is written, it won't mention your excuses. It won't list the days you felt tired. It won't highlight the moments you almost gave up. It will only remember what you became, what you built. And all of that will trace back to what you learned. What you chose to understand when most people chose to escape. Because in the end, every fortune is just wisdom. Monetized, every breakthrough is clarity, applied. Every success is not luck. It's the result of insight meeting action at just the right moment. And the man who was ready, not just reactive, was the one who walked through the door before anyone else noticed it had opened. But most men, they miss it, because their eyes were on comfort, not clarity. Their days were filled with distraction, not design, and their minds were too noisy to catch the signals. Life was screaming at them. Let me tell you something painful but necessary. Life whispers the truth to every man, but only the learner hears it. And that whisper, it's not polite, it's not convenient, it doesn't care about your feelings. It shows up when you're alone, when you're broken, when you're staring at your own reflection, wondering why things still feel stuck. And in that silence, you'll hear it. If you're ready. You haven't learned what you were supposed to yet. Not because you are a failure, but because you are unfinished. And being unfinished is not a curse, it's a calling. It means there's still more to shape, still more to uncover, still more to build. And that should light a fire in your chest so hot, it burns away every excuse you've been carrying. Because the man who learns is never helpless. He is never stuck. He is never at the mercy of circumstance. Because he knows, no matter what happens to him, he can study it, decode it, transform it. He knows the question to ask. He knows how to turn pain into power, delay into strategy, failure into feedback. He is never out of options, because he's always increasing his mental arsenal. That is the real edge in life. Not money, not talent, not fame, but having answers when no one else does, knowing what to do when others panic, seeing clearly when everyone else goes blind. And if you want that kind of strength, it won't come from hoping. It won't come from wishing. It comes from learning. Deep, daily, deliberate learning. The kind of learning that rewires your choices, reconstructs your mindset, rebuilds your instincts, until success is no longer something you chase. It's just something that flows from who you are. And here is the paradox. The more you learn, the the more you realize you don't know. And that humility, that's power, because it keeps you sharp, it keeps you hungry, it keeps you moving long after others have settled. The man who knows he hasn't arrived yet is the man who becomes unstoppable, because he never stops looking, never stops evolving, never stops refining, and every time he learns, his power compounds, his vision expands, his voice strengthens, until the world doesn't just pay him, they follow him. And why? Because he earned it. Not with noise, but with knowledge. Not with opinion, but with understanding. He became rare. And in a world flooded with surface-level, scroll, hungry men who never studied anything deeper than a headline, rarity is value. So what does this mean for you? It means you don't need to shout to stand out. You need to learn what others fear, master what others neglect, and apply what others only. Quote, "You need to become the man whose mind is built like a cathedral, every stone laid by thought, every line carved by truth, every room echoing with clarity." That's who the world is dying to hear from. That's who they pay attention to. That's who they follow when the noise gets too loud. Not the influencer, the intellect, not the pretender, the prepared. And the only way to become him is this. Make your mind your most sacred project. Build it with intention. Fuel it with timeless truth. Sharpen it like your survival depends on it. And never, never allow it to go soft again. You've already wasted enough years living below your potential. You've already given away too many mornings to meaningless routines. You've already watched others win and wondered why you're still in the same place. It ends today because now you know the truth. You don't earn more by trying harder. You earn more by learning deeper. So from this moment forward, make your learning law. Build a schedule around your study. Protect your mornings like royalty. Read with urgency. Write with clarity. Think like an architect. Move like a man who knows. And say this every morning before the world gets a chance to distract you. I build wealth through wisdom. I sharpen my mind before I chase results. I study the structure of success and align my life with its blueprint. Say it until it rewires your nervous system. Say it until your posture changes. Say it until your bank account, your calendar, your circle, all reflect what you've become. A master of information, a student of life, a commander of self. Because the world doesn't need another entertainer. It needs men of depth. It needs men who read when others scroll, who think when others react, who design when others drift, who lead. Not because they're louder, but because they've learned. So make the vow now. I will learn until I earn. I will grow until I command. I will study until success becomes my default setting. Because the man who learns more, he earns more. Not just in dollars, but in destiny. You see, most men are chasing success like it's running from them. They sprint toward opportunity, panting, desperate, empty-handed, because they never stop to prepare for it. You weren't meant to chase, you were meant to attract. And what attracts wealth, power, peace, and respect? One thing, the quality of your mind. Not how loud you are, not how charismatic, not how busy, but how sharp, how deep, how well trained. The men who dominate in silence aren't louder, they're just clearer, and clarity is currency. In every room, every board meeting, every battle, clarity wins. And you don't get clarity by wishing, you get it by learning obsessively, repeatedly, relentlessly. Every time you pick up a book, you're building artillery. Every time you analyze your failure, you're stacking ammunition. Every time you rewatch that lecture, break down that essay, rewrite that thought until it's clean enough to lead a nation, you're forging a weapon the world will have to respect, because no one can argue with results. And results come to the man who prepares when others procrastinate. This world doesn't belong to the confident. It belongs to the competent. And competence is not luck. It's not style. It's not a trend. It's the outcome of years of unglamorous mental labor. Study, review, repeat, until it becomes you. But here's what most men miss. They think success is about doing more, but it's really about understanding more. Because when you understand at a higher level, you execute with less waste, less friction, less trial and error. You move with precision. You make decisions that ripple for decades. You speak and people move. Because you've studied so much truth that even your silence starts to carry weight. So let's stop pretending. Let's stop pretending your problem is lack of opportunity, or motivation, or energy. Your problem is you haven't learned what's required yet. You haven't learned how to lead. You haven't learned how to endure. You haven't learned how to say no, how to budget time, how to outthink your fear. And until you do, you'll stay stuck. Not because you're broken, but because your blueprint is incomplete. And this world, it rewards the man with the complete blueprint. So build it, one concept at a time, one page at a time, one reflection, one principle, one undeniable line of truth at a time. Stack so much understanding inside your chest that when you speak, it echoes. When you act, it lands. When you move, people feel like something real just walked into the room. Because something real did. A man who has mastered himself. Not through noise, not through hype, but through repeated mental elevation. That's how you get ahead. Not by shouting louder, not by chasing fads, but by becoming so deeply aligned with timeless principles that the modern world cannot compete with your clarity. You are not here to react. You are here to build. You are not here to be impressive. You are here to be indispensable. And indispensability starts with knowledge. Commanded knowledge, lived knowledge. The kind of knowledge that becomes instinct, not just insight. The kind of knowledge that lets you walk into any situation and see angles no one else sees. Not because you are lucky, but because you trained your mind to see what others miss. That's what study does. It gives you eyes when others are blind. It gives you stillness when others are panicked. It gives you patience when others are impulsive. And most of all, it gives you range. The range to handle more, think deeper, decide faster, build bigger. That is how you earn, not through speed, but through scale. And you can't scale chaos. You can only scale clarity. And clarity comes from learning, refining, and applying, until everything that once confused you becomes so obvious you wonder how you ever missed it. You want to become dangerous, then become informed. Not emotionally reactive, intellectually undeniable. And if that sounds heavy, it should, because the weight of greatness is heavy, but so is regret, so is failure, so is staying stuck in a loop for 10 years while pretending you're making progress because you're working hard. Hard work without learning is the most exhausting trap there is. You'll break your back on a ladder that's leaning against the wrong wall. And by the time you realize it, you've wasted your prime trying to solve problems with the same level of thinking that created them. But not you. Not anymore. From now on, you don't work first. You learn first. You don't sprint blind. You study the map. You don't beg for better outcomes. You become the man who earns them. And that shift, that's not soft. That's sovereign. It's the shift from worker to commander, from confused to calibrated, from dreamer to designer. And that kind of man is unstoppable. He doesn't need luck. He creates leverage. He doesn't need applause. His results speak louder. He doesn't fear problems. He welcomes them, because he knows he's trained to solve them. This is who you must become now. Not a collector of quotes, not a consumer of feel-good content, but a craftsman of comprehension, a builder of wisdom, a scholar of your own destiny. Because the more you learn, the more you earn. It's not a catchphrase, it's economic law, it's spiritual law, it's leadership law. And if you obey that law long enough, deeply enough, violently enough, you will become the kind of man who never needs to chase anything ever again, because everything is drawn to the one who understands. And when that moment comes, when you finally look around and realize you're no longer running, no longer grasping, no longer begging, you'll know it was never luck. It was law. You didn't get lucky. You got precise. You read when others relaxed. You rewrote your thinking when others clung to comfort. You studied instead of scrolled. You reflected instead of reacted. You sharpened your mind until it was a blade, and then you carved your own path. And now here you are, no longer overwhelmed by complexity, no longer drowning in uncertainty. Because you earned clarity, you earned control, you earned peace. You stopped pretending you didn't know what to do, and you started becoming the man who knew because he learned. This is the secret they won't teach you in school, because real power doesn't come from credentials. It comes from commitment. It comes from daily, violent, uncompromising study of the patterns of life, of the laws of wealth, of the psychology of influence, of the frameworks of success that most people never even see, because they never stopped talking long enough to listen. But you listened. You saw through the noise, through the fake hustle, through the empty hype, and you made a different choice. You chose depth. You chose precision. You chose learning. And now the world has to respond. Because when you know what you're doing, when you know what you are building, you stop apologizing. You stop doubting. You stop waiting. You become the architect of every room you walk into, the strategist in every storm, the reference point for others who've lost their way. That is who you are now. Not a motivational junkie. Not a man chasing feelings, but a man anchored in law, in rhythm, in command. And the best part, you're still just getting started. Because when learning becomes your lifestyle, every ceiling becomes a floor. Every no becomes a redirection. Every failure becomes a refinement. You can't lose. Not because life won't hit you, but because you've built a mind that's unshakable. You've studied so deeply that no market crash, no breakup, no setback can erase the infrastructure you've laid brick by brick, lesson by lesson, truth by truth. That's why you earn now. That's why you rise now. That's why you lead now. Because when others spent their time drifting, you were learning. When others numbed their minds, you were building yours. And now, you don't just carry information, you carry impact. You walk differently, speak differently, think differently, because you are different. You've earned the right to demand more, because you've become more. No shortcuts, no noise, no gimmicks, just work, just structure, just law, And law always pays its student. So the question now is simple. Will you keep learning, or will you settle? Will you return to comfort, or will you press deeper? Because mastery is not a finish line. It's a ritual, a rhythm, a refusal to ever become stale. And the man who obeys that rhythm, he earns everything. He earns the peace others chase in vacations. He earns the influence others try to buy with brands. He earns the wealth others talk about but never touch. Because he learned what matters. And so I ask you now, with the full weight of your future on the line, what are you still pretending not to know? What truth are you avoiding? What lesson have you postponed because it was too uncomfortable, too boring, too demanding? Face it now, study it now, burn it into your bones now. Because that lesson, that's the key to your next level, and it won't wait forever. So say this, one last time, not as a phrase, not as a motto, but as a vow, a war cry for the man you now are. The more I learn, the more I earn. I do not drift, I study. I do not beg, I build. I do not wish, I understand. And because I learn, I lead. Because I learn, I earn. Now go, open the book, take the note, ask the question, study until your name becomes a result. Repeat until the world cannot ignore you. You don't need more hype, you need more truth. And you just heard it. Now live it forever.